Thank you all for coming out on a Thursday evening. I'm really excited about tonight's talk with Jeff Hall. By the way, I'm Corey Fry, the exhibitions manager here. If we haven't met, but it's good to see you all. A lot of familiar faces. Jeff Hall received his BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. He received the James L. Young Memorial Prize, Award for Excellence, and a Merit Scholarship for Outstanding Achievement. Hall has received numerous museum sculpture awards. His ceramic and bronze sculpture has been shown internationally, and his architectural sculptures adorns government buildings, churches, and estates, including 2 commissions for the U.S. Capitol Building, the Park Potomac Building, the Turkish Embassy residence, and the Washington National Cathedral in D.C. He's going to talk quite a bit about his history and some of the projects that he has going on now as well. But would you welcome up Jeff Hall?
I recognize a few of you in here, but I'm Jeff Hall. And my studio is in Northern Virginia. It's out by Harper's Ferry, so I'm kind of a local. I've been an artist my entire life in one respect or another. I started out, taught myself airbrush. This is a tribute car that we did, a cancer tribute car, where the dragon is the cancer and the sword is chemo. And you can see up on the right, the knight that was on the hood represented the doctors who fought. So this was a great project that I worked on and helped raise money for the Cancer Society and that. So when I went to school, I was a painting major. But I grew up, my stepdad had a wood shop, and so I learned woodworking when I was young. So I took some wood classes and at the Maryland Institute. And during these classes, I would make little models in clay and then see if I could build them out of wood. So it was a lot of very organic and sculptural shapes. And eventually I decided I really didn't like the dirt of woodworking, the dust, you couldn't listen to music, and I just started focusing on the clay. So in that, I had a friend who was working for an architectural ornament company, and he wanted me to turn him a baluster, and then they wanted some leaves on the baluster, and I ended up doing more ornament. So that was the big shift into sculpting and getting away from woodworking. I'd already kind of abandoned my painting at that point. So, what is next? This. So there's a large architectural piece, a building. The scale when you see something on a building is much bigger than it looks. And this relates also to doing a figure. Doing a life-size figure seems small when it's out next to buildings. So I usually recommend doing large scale. But this company was owned by Hitler and Hart, and Frederick Hart was one of the owners, and he asked me to be his assistant. So this is Rick and I working on a large piece that was actually going on a building, up in a tympanum on a building. And you may know Frederick Hart's work. He did the tympanum in the Washington National Cathedral. This is called Ex Nihilo, which is
this all water-based clay?
This is out of nothing. No, he used oil-based clay. Yeah. Something I also learned that from doing a lot of the ornament was mold making. So, and the idea that you could make the same piece over and over and sell it over and over was very appealing, And woodworking, you just made the one, and then that was it. And so, yeah, I worked for Rick for 11 years, learning this process, and that's when I really became more of a figure sculptor. after Rick died, I spent 5 years finishing his final works. He had a copy of the Tempanum in his studio, and we made molds on all the figures, along with some lucite pieces. But I was in place to help him, as we all wonder what's going to happen to our half worked on pieces. You know, I think he would have been really glad that we finished a lot of them for him. These were my bread and butter pieces. Rick and I always talked about beauty and art and decay, and so I thought, well, what could I bring to the figure that hasn't been done for thousands of years? It's classical figure work, and so I started to abstract the figure, and thinking about what I used to do for Rick was build the armatures underneath, and so what if the skin was off and it revealed the armature underneath a little bit? The brick seemed to work really well. I tried other things, stone, but there's something about that geometric shape going around curves that was very appealing. Most of the figures are about body language. I didn't do a lot of heads. I felt like when you live with a piece of artwork, it's nice for it to change with your moods. Is it agony or ecstasy? You're in a bad mood and things are bad, and so are your sculpture. You know, you relate to it and think, you know, this is agony. And when you're happy and things are going good, then your piece is in ecstasy. She's fine, you know. So that approach with art really appeals to a lot of people, and I think that's why they buy art, is to live with it and have it be a part of them throughout their lives with that. So I've worked in a lot of mediums. This Rick did a lot of lucite, and so I started blending bronze and lucite. Lucite's a really hard plastic, so you can polish it to look like glass. This is a piece that it was one of those pieces that evolves. A lot of people think you just have this genius idea and you execute it, but art evolves. On the left, is it the left? There you go. It started out as a sundial for the metro station in Dallas. I didn't get the commission, but he's holding a gnome, and it goes in a semicircle of that kind of cloud chaos that the shadow would. I never did put numbers on it because I couldn't figure out how to put numbers up on that cloud without ruining the whole aesthetics of the piece. But in creating this, I just had that, and I thought, well, what's his purpose? Why is he trying to block the sun? Why is he trying to create a shadow? And, well, man is always chasing woman, so I created this moon goddess. If he can create shadow and bring out the night, then maybe he could bring her out. And so they're kind of star-crossed lovers in that respect. I get a lot of people asking me what my favorite piece is, and this sustainability is my favorite piece of mine. It's about man balanced in nature. Fish are the water rising up, turning into the birds, which represent the air. The ring has two represent, like the sun, but also man trying to get nature to jump through his hoops and control the uncontrollable. In 08, the economy crashed, and at the time I had 34 galleries selling my work, and in 08 or in 09 I had 3. So it took me 15 years to build up enough galleries to be able to make a living selling your work with the torsos and the lucite pieces. So this commission, I realized this was for the War College in Washington, and a relief can tell a lot. You can tell a lot of a story with a relief that you can't with a single figure. So I started taking on and focusing more on public art. In this piece, over Grant's shoulder, over his back is the cannons, and there's a battle map up in the left-hand corner, and then there's a little relief of Appomattox where they signed the surrender. And then in front of him is the stars representing his presidency in the United States there. But I had a friend tell me, no matter how well you sculpt a figure, if the face isn't good, if the face isn't right, then it's a failure. Because people will look right at that face, and so I started focusing more on faces.
What's the size of that?
That piece, I don't know, it's like this, probably 3 feet by 1.5 feet or something. Yeah, the torsos, I didn't have heads on those because they were about body language. It wasn't because I couldn't sculpt the face. It was just that I was wanting to be about the body language, as I mentioned. So this was my first real public art. It's Kemal Ataturk. He was the president of Turkey in the 1920s. And so they always said, if you get your first one, you're on your way. And it happened like that. Once you can say I worked with Frederick Hart and I know how to build armatures and I can do these large pieces, but until you do one, people, they just don't trust. Working with public art is just way different. You talk about your work differently. When you're working with gallery art, you're talking about dreams and ideas, and you're not concerned about scale relationships in your piece. And when you're doing public art, they want to know, can you be on budget and can you be on time? You're dealing with council people or Parks and Rec, and like that. So it's just took me a while to, as my wife said, you got too much art fluff in your proposal, You need to just talk about how you're going to handle this, and that's it. And she was right. That was true. It's an unlikely pair, Republican and Democrat. So Dan Quayle is in the Capitol building in marble. They do all the vice presidents in marble. And then Hillary Clinton is in the Clinton Library down in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, I won a commission to do Martin Luther King, and I'd never done a black person before. And inevitably, your own features come out a little bit in your portraits. It just happens. You look in the mirror, at yourself a dozen times a day, and I still get that people say they see my eyes, even in Hillary Clinton. That's kind of your eye socket. But you work on not doing that. But so I got this commission for Martin Luther King, and I thought, well, I need to practice sculpting some black man. So I chose Morgan Freeman from the movie Glory. It just seemed like he's a very interesting character, and plus it would appeal to a lot more people if I could ever sell it, since I was just doing it, for a practice piece. This is the King piece, the finished one. I did a little plaza when we did King, and so I made these organic benches, and the space was already there. It's the King Library in Denver, and so we did this micro-topping, kind of created like a rug, and created a sense of place by placing the benches. Then the King quotes are in the benches there. So the process is you build a little maquette. It's behind me, and you show that with your proposal. And then if you get it, you build a 3-foot model of King. If you're going to do large, like 7-foot figure, on the right there, they took it and had him scanned, and then they cut it out of foam. So that's the picture on the left. Then you skim the foam with clay to work up and finish, put all the details in. You need to do the 3-foot model because the little maquette is just, there isn't enough detail, and the scale won't transfer if you had that scanned. So you move it at the 3-foot scale so that you can have precise measurements, so then when they scan it and move it up, everything's correct. If he was a half-inch off on the little one, he's going to be an inch and a half off on the big one. So those little imperfections really magnify themselves. So I usually sculpt the head and the hands separate. That way I can just sit and focus on those. I see sculptors that sculpt with the head on the piece, and they're on ladders and trying to sculpt the details of the eyes, but it's much easier if you just do them off to the side and then just plug them in. You can see that they're just on a little piece of armature there. So I usually get a friend to model for me. This happens to be Toby Mendez. He's a well-known sculptor in the area. Got him to model for me. This is a maquette from that of Stanley Calkins. It's a piece that's down in Leesburg. And the great thing then, when you're proposing, when they're small like that, you can turn their head, figure out, well, is he facing whoever's sitting on the bench with him, or is he facing the people walking by? You know, you have to make those kind of decisions, and it's much easier when they're at that scale. If it's a life-size piece, I'll just make the foam myself, because measurements, I just take the measurements off myself, you know, instead of trying to have it enlarged in that expense. So the orange one is just a sealer that's on there, a shellac, so the clay will stick to the foam. And that's the finished clay, or close to the finished clay. You can see the little maquette in the background. By the way, if I'm moving too slow, just cough and I'll speed things up.
And then as the next step, you go into a foundry to do it in bronze?
Yeah, there's some of those details on his hands. When I was talking about reliefs before and how you can tell a story. So Stanley was in the VFW, so we put his hat on him. He was a jeweler, so he's got a little microscope magnifier on his glasses. His tie is also diamonds on his tie. Then he's got a little tie clip that's a B-17, because when he was in the military, he was a bombardier on a B-17. So you put as many of those elements into the sculpture to tell the story about the person as you can. Here we are making a mold. His foot is cut off and up on the bench to make that part. In the middle is rubber, so you brush on rubber. The legs have already had rubber, and then a plaster shell is put over that. And the plaster shell is put on so that when you take it apart, it holds the rubber to its shape. There's the completed mold. There you can see the 3 layers. So you take it to the foundry, they brush wax in. They brush it in about a 1/4 inch thick. That's going to be the thickness of the metal. So once they brush the wax in, they're in pieces. They usually like them kind of small pieces. So you have to find parting lines that are easy to weld back together. You can't have it a difficult area. You can see the diamonds on his tie in this better. So then they hook these, they're called gates. And this is where the metal will flow in and let air out. They take the waxes, and they dip them in this slurry. It's like a ceramic slurry. They dip it in the slurry, and they put sand on it, and they dip it in the slurry. They do that 2 or 3 times to build up this shell. And then they'll put that shell into an oven, and it'll harden the shell and melt the wax out. And where the wax melts out, that's the void they'll use to pour in the bronze. So then you can see they flip them upside down, and there's an area for the bronze to go in and for the air to come out. So then you get them, this isn't Stanley, but they're all in their pieces, and they have to be welded back together. So they're welding his glasses on here. And I found glasses, it's better if you can somehow sculpt them on the figure rather than a separate pair of glasses, which I made that mistake here. And somebody already tried to bend them off. And the foundry was said they have that problem with a lot of sculptures, that they're replacing glasses on all the time. So there is a good technique I've seen some sculptors use where they partially just insinuate that they're wearing glasses. The patinas are put on. The patinas are like an acid. The Romans used to use urine or lemons or something, and it's just an acid that in the heat changes colors. We usually use kind of a honey color. Most bronze looks like a honey or a red color. And there he is in place with a visitor. And that's really fun to see people pose with your sculpture later, make fun of it or whatever. They put stocking caps on him for Christmas and dress him up. I still like to do fabrication. It goes back to my woodworking days. I just installed this last month in a skate park in Virginia Beach. The bottom is lit. You can see on one side it's kind of a bluish and the other side it's green. And it just changes colors back and forth. This one, unfortunately, the unveiling got rained out, and so they canceled any unveiling. And, you know, as artists, we live by our publicity. We need those unveilings, and so I'm trying to get them to get it on 4 o'clock news or something, put it in the paper. So.
Well, especially even for the city, they would, you know, kind of be on.
Yeah.
And also like the wonderfulness of what we're doing.
Yeah, I've had that happen a couple of times, and generally it happens because they switched their public art coordinator. And I'm on my 3rd one with this particular project. It was supposed to be unveiled in the fall in like September, but they switched out, and she was from Kansas City, she didn't know this area, so I was fine with them putting it off. Yeah, you get to know your job, and then we'll properly get a nice unveiling, but they got canceled, and now the mayor's too busy or something to, I don't know why they are not going to actually have an unveiling. But you build something like this, the rule of thumb in engineering, as you may know, is 3 football players climbing on it in a hurricane. That's what it's got to hold up to. And you constantly have to think about that when you're putting public art out there, because kids will climb on it, and especially at a skate park, but just anywhere they'll climb on it. When I did Martin Luther King, they reinforced his one arm with stainless steel underneath because they thought, well, kids are going to hang on that arm, you know, and the public is pretty rough on things. Well, these are the pieces I'm currently in my studio. The one on the left is Struggle for Education, which I'm installing tomorrow in Leesburg. It's finished in bronze. And the one on the right is a Duck Hunter. It's just a private commission, but a real fun piece. Some, you know, anytime you get to put a lot of wrinkles and action in a piece, that's a whole lot of fun. So I believe that's the last slide. So that's it. I'm also working on an Obama piece for the Douglas Center in Leesburg, a 7-foot Obama, and he's pretty much finished, but I didn't have him in here, so. I got busy all of a sudden. And they all come in at the same time, and it's feast or famine, as they say. Well, we have a open studio is June 7th and 8th. Our county, Loudoun County, has Western Loudoun Artist Studio Tour. That's what it's called, WLAST. If you want to look that up, and if you ever want to come out, then, you know, there's an open studio in June, and or any other time. I just work at home, so. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah. When does your involvement with a sculpture stop? Are you involved or with them when they're casting it at the foundry? Change based on the project?
Yeah, the foundries have you come up and check on the waxes, because if there's any problems, it's easier to correct in wax before it gets to metal. So you go up there for that and check on the waxes. Then you go up for you might go up for some assembly. They might have it tacked together just to make sure everything's, again, going well, and you have to be there for patina. Some foundries are, you get to know them, some of them are really good, you don't really have to go for assembly. They can fix anything if there's still a dent. I did one of a swimmer, and his mother was a swimmer, and she came up to the foundry and found his shoulder wasn't right, and it was actually kind of a wave in the wax. You know, if it gets warm and they lay the wax sideways or something, it can slump. You know, it's only 1/4 inch thick. But yeah, you have to be there for that process. They always want a maintenance package on how to maintain the piece, waxing it, keeping it up. But anytime, if anything happened within the first year, you know, you'd fix it. You know, then it's pretty much after the first year, you're like, oh, it's on them now.
Do you do your own mold making?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, you can send that out, but it's costly for one, and I know how to do it. So yeah, I do my own molds. A lot of sculptors do their own molds to some degree. You know, if you get large scale, they might try to farm it out, or if the money's there, you know, you'd rather farm it out. I'm not that good at the proposal side and the writing and all that. My friend Toby Mendez is a writer, pretty much, and he's great at that. So he just prices in and has other people do his molds, and he moves on. He makes his money by moving on to the next project, you know. Or to me, I'll make my money doing that. I've always considered myself a little bit more of a craftsman than a creative artist anyway, you know. So getting back to that is just that hands-on work. You know.
How do you decide on pricing of sculptures in that?
Well, when you do the maquette, you can send that out to foundries, and they'll give you a rough price for what that's going to cost, mold making and casting. The rest is just about how long it's going to take you, and they usually take me about a month, just for my sculpture part. The whole process usually takes about a year.
Yeah.
And people are usually taken aback by that. You know, like, can you have it in a couple months? And like, no, the foundry needs 5 months just to cast it. Mold making's a couple weeks, you know. Then I need from maquette, then build the middle one. You know, there's a month there, a month for the 3-foot size, a month for the final piece. And then there's always that time where you're waiting for them to come and approve it, which, you know, they're out of town or the committees can't get together, and there's always that vague time. But during those gaps is when you can work on other projects. Like I said, I had the Duck Hunter and Obama going at the same time. While I was waiting for them to approve the small Obama, I started working on Duck Hunter, you know. Then you come back to the Obama, and now he's going to be enlarged because he was 7 foot, so I had him scanned and cut out of foam.
So when you do a
Well-
public project, are they giving you what they want to pay for it, or are you telling them what it's going to cost?
It's both. If you're entering a competition, there's a budget, you know, and you look through that. There's a good site now, publicart.org, you know, that has a lot of calls from around the country and Europe. And there'll be a budget, and you just got to figure, can I do that for that budget? Or depends on how starving you are. Whether it's like, oh, okay, but like a Duck Hunter or something, like a life-size piece like that's about 70,000, 70 to 80. This one with the dog, I think I charged him actually 85 for that because of the ducks. Ducks are going to be, they're really going to challenge my mold making skills. Making a mold on those.
Do you work alone?
I do work alone, but I'm probably going to need an assistant for these mold makings if anyone's interested. But an assistant isn't what you think. It's mostly cleaning buckets and straightening up. Because I've had assistants, I think they're going to get in there and work on the figures, and no.
How about the installs? Do you get help for installs?
Yeah, that somehow has always worked itself out. There's always a a lot of times the buildings are under construction, so you can connect with the construction group there, you know, and get a couple of those people to help you, or if it's stone work, the stone guys will, you know, usually do more than their share. I've used a cast stone company in Manassas for some bases. They're cheaper that way, but they can colorize them. And they bring it out, they just bring their rig, and I just have them help me set the piece. That's what I'll do tomorrow. Setting that. Well, you want to help me? Help me set this piece. It should go in pretty easy, and they go in by, at the bottom, there's a nut that they weld on. And then there's threaded rod that goes into that, and so we drill into the stone, and then epoxy the piece.
So was that cast into the piece?
No, the foundries add that.
Add that,
Mhm.
okay.
Right to the feet or the base somehow.
When you scan your model and then go to the foam,
Yeah.
how does the foam get cut?
Well, there's a couple of ways. Some of them are on a kind of a flat bed, and they're cut in pieces. The one company I was using had this giant robotic arm,
Oh.
and the piece itself down there is on a little turntable, so it turns, and the robotic arm is turning. They still can't get into like sharp creases in here, so, but the foam, you just fold a piece of sandpaper and knock those creases out, give yourself room. After they scan it, they can enlarge it, they can reduce it, they can offset it. And offsetting is where you reduce the whole piece maybe a 1/4 inch, which allows for your clay, so the piece doesn't get too bulky or swollen looking.
So is that a laser cut, or?
No, they just offset it in the computer. And then when they cut it out of foam, it's just a little smaller.
What machine do they use to cut it out of the foam is what I'm asking.
The router.
Yeah, it's a router.
It's a router, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, different bits in a router. Yeah, this one's a 7-axis, so you have access of it turning around, and then the arm.
The lasers and the scanning of it, right? That must be really complicated.
Yeah, the scanning, well, then the light doesn't get everywhere, so they have to go into the computer and clean out the shadows, because the light didn't get behind the ear or, you know, up under, so you have to have somebody go in there, clean out the shadows, otherwise they're gonna be a void, you know.
So do sculptors use the same scanning people?
There's various ones. I quit using the one that I'm pictured with here. He's in up by Trenton in Philly. Now they can 3D print these, but they're plastic, 3D print is. And the great thing about the foam is if things are a little off, you just take a knife and you just shave that foam back, you know. And I just tried, the guy was so excited about his new 3D printer, it's huge. You could drive a car into it, you know, printing really big stuff. And so he gave me a really cheap price, you know, just so but to change anything, you have to use a saw and cut that plastic, you know. And then this piece I'm working on now, Obama, his tie area wasn't right, and I just cut that out and then just put a big piece of clay in there and went from scratch, you know, because to try to manipulate that. So I don't think I'll do 3D printing anymore. It worked great for the duck hunter and the dog, because the dog's legs in foam would have been so thin, trying to put clay on, they would have just broke, you know. So he was in plastic, and they're very light, you know. So who's that duck hunter? Yeah, dog was real easy. Plus, I could just screw right through his paw and screw him down. There's no armature wire to build, so that was pretty nice to just sculpt a little one, have it scanned, and then blow it up to that scale.
Was that duck hunter's face like just out of your mind, or
No.
was it a family member?
Yeah, it was a family member.
I was wondering.
Yeah. The great thing about some, you know, there's nothing like a crooked mouth or a crooked face, because then the sculpting becomes real easy, because you can really capture a character like that. And he had a funny little turn on one of his on his mouth. He's got emblem on his hat. He was a lacrosse player. We were trying to figure out how do we get that fact in here. Well, he went to Notre Dame as a lacrosse player, so we put that on his hat instead of. Yeah, love showing off.